Good evening. So we're continuing, right? Continuing the City of Albany Budget Committee meeting. May we have a roll call, please?
Sykes.
Here.
Vernig. Brenneman.
Here.
Keller.
Here.
Canopa.
Here.
Folden.
Here.
Olson.
Here.
Summers.
Here.
Kellum.
Here.
Alex Johnson.
Here.
Coburn.
Here.
Bessie Johnson.
Here.
Thompson.
Here.
Thank you. So Peter has some opening
Yes.
remarks, and we'll continue with our budget review. And I've been told, since we've noticed for our meeting next week, we will not be voting tonight, lest you think we're going really quickly this evening. So plenty of time to deliberate.
Good evening, Chair Folden and Budget Committee members. There's no need for, and I have no intention of talking for an hour and a half.
Thank you.
I do, however, have to mention a few things. First, I told you the other night that transient lodging tax revenue has steadily declined for 3 years at a rate of approximately 1% per year. I was wrong. Revenues grew steadily from 2010 to 2017 at rates between 4 and 17% per year. But in the 2017-18 year, they dropped by 1%. For your reference, they grew from about 657,000 in 2010 and 11 to 1.08 million in 2016 and 17 before they reversed that trend. Unless we see revenues of about 321,000 for the period April through June of this year, which is possible, they're on track to decrease again.
How far are they going to decrease? Decrease to what?
Well, it just depends on how much business the hotels see. Yeah. Last night, the council approved increases in fire and life safety fees and ambulance service fees. If the Budget Committee and the council approve, the revenue generated from these increases may be returned to the fire department to help mitigate some of the drastic measures that are included in this budget. It may also free up some funds from the general fund that could be used in concert with tuition increases to subsidize Maple Lawn Preschool for 1 more year, giving time for GAPS and nonprofits and other interested parties to create a plan for future operations of the school past June of 2020. These are steps that the Budget Committee may consider and which the staff can incorporate into the budget if it's the Budget Committee's direction that we do so. Finance has prepared program changes and sent them to you by email and placed them on the dais in front of you. They reflect that the approximate $900,000 is anticipated to be brought into the fire department's fire and life safety and emergency services programs, which allows an increase of $125,000 from the general fund to police and $132,000 to fund Maple Lawn Preschool for 1 year. As the saying goes, hindsight is 20/20. Perhaps fee increases and other revenue enhancements should have or could have been considered at an earlier date. Our charge, however, is to do the best with the resources we have. And my responsibility is to present you with a balanced, sustainable budget within those resource constraints. This budget is balanced, and it is sustainable for the biennium. Tonight, each of our directors is available to answer any in-depth questions you might have, with the exception of Jorge, who's attending his daughter's graduation in Texas. But though the budget for the coming biennium is sustainable, one of our responsibilities is to start thinking about the next biennial budget and how well we're setting ourselves up for the future. In this coming biennium, as you've heard, we've had to account for PERS costs that will be 33% of personnel costs. Projections are that that will only increase for the next 3 biennia, 6 years. If that's the case, then we'll find ourselves in a similar position just 24 months from now. To balance the budget 2 years from now, we may be facing more cuts, either in positions here and there or cutting an entire program. If the community is willing to shoulder a heavier burden to keep those services, then other measures may be considered, some of which I mentioned on Tuesday night. Utility fees, an increase in our public safety levy, an increase in franchise fees, etc. If the Budget Committee desires further information, Gina and I are prepared to provide some of that tonight. But as you're aware, implementing either or any combination of those measures will take significant staff preparation. It's now that we should start thinking about that so that we won't then be thinking that hindsight is 20/20. We're happy to take your questions.
So just clarifying the materials that were provided here, the personnel change report with the highlights, these highlighted things are still in the numbers that we've just received?
They are still, so they actually reflect the narratives that you had received in the binders. We also changed it from approved or
Authorized.
Authorized, thank you. An authorized to a budgeted position. One of the things we're thinking about doing on the adopted budget for people who want to track a little bit better is on the narrative, putting down a 5-year target number for personnel so that, people can see what we really think we need to have, but they can also see what we can afford to staff.
Okay.
Good. That was a suggestion I wanted to make. The 2016-17 taxes from rooms were heavily influenced by a one-time event. And one-time events, you could look at trend and see what, and I have a few times on that data set, and you went way above trend. The city would have been wise to have banked that trend, that above-trend money to take into account for what's going to happen later and been able to spread the largesse for a little bit longer. That's one thing we didn't talk about at the diocese here. And so I'm interested in hearing a little bit more tonight.
Question. The personal change report reflects in 2019 to 2020 a total reduction of 9, almost 10 full-time employees. Is that correct? Two-thirds of that would be either police or fire. So what we passed last night is not reflected in this reduction?
Let me double check that. Holly gave this to me this afternoon and I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. I believe that this is related to the original proposed budget, so no, that would not be reflected in
This is not accurate then?
It would not be accurate because it's also, if we keep Maple Lawn for the 2021, or the fiscal year 20, we wouldn't necessarily delete those positions yet either. It would come in the 2021 fiscal year.
So what are the actual numbers for the reduction in staff and police and fire for 2019 to 2020?
So police should still be approximately the same unless they choose to use the additional funding to help fund a position. If I remember correctly, John, it's 6 positions that will be funded for the rest of the biennium. Is that correct?
That's correct. In the fire department, there were 4 potential layoffs and then 2 demotions, and so it would take care of all 6 of those positions.
Well, what we approved last night?
Correct.
Increases?
So the fire department of losing 2 full-time employees is not accurate. We wouldn't lose those.
So I would have 3 firefighter positions that would be frozen for the year, 2 of them of which are not filled currently, and then another one that I expect to be vacant in the next year.
And then I see the police department is going to lose 4 full-time employees.
Yes, that's correct. And that still would be the same because there isn't any money to sustain another position in year 2. So I currently have 3, I have 2 frozen right now. I've got 1 that'll be frozen in July, due to a medical issue.
So is there any natural attrition in this, people moving?
Yeah, and then I have a captain who's retiring. So, yeah, it's attrition, but the impact's going to be a year from now, because it takes a year to hire and train. We're going to be short on patrol, and I won't have any backfill. So we usually have about 4 to 7 people in hiring and training at any one time. Right now, I've got 2, and I've got 3 other positions that are frozen. So a year from now is really when we're going to have a lot of problems.
Thanks, Chief.
So based on what I'm hearing, can we get some updated figures on full-time employees, please?
No.
The reduction in staff?
I can have Holly update those and we can email them to you tomorrow.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Please send that to all of us, I'm sure, right? Yeah.
Oh, it would go to the entire budget committee.
Thank you.
Sharon?
So, Chief Latanzio, so in order to keep, say, this year, your staffing levels current without having to lay off anyone or reduce anyone, what is your dollar amount that you are needing?
After the 125 that we were allocated, it's 518,000.
518. And then Chief Bradner, what is yours? For this fiscal year, since you got most all of yours back then?
Right, so was your question to avoid layoffs or to keep all positions?
To avoid any layoffs.
What we received from the fee increase last night will put us in a position to avoid all layoffs.
Okay, all right. So,
Mine doesn't include layoffs, that's just to fully fund all the positions.
okay,
There's no layoffs in mine.
no layoffs. in
Correct, because I
yours.
currently have 3 of them that are already frozen that we didn't fill just because we knew we were going to be short the following year.
Okay, so 518, though, would keep you
Would fully fund us, correct?
fully funded for this year.
Yes.
So then, so Peter, if we did franchise fees, what kind of, if we ended up using our full authority for imposing franchise fees on some of the utilities, how much would that bring in revenue?
Do you estimate of that?
Let me do a quick check on that.
Jeff Blaine says about 350,000.
And is that Pacific Power, Northwest Natural?
I think it's Northwest Natural.
And Allied Way, or Republic Services.
Okay, so about 350. And for that process, that is something that we just would end up needing to pass at the council level for a resolution?
We would have to
Proposing it?
negotiate with the companies first.
Oh, you would?
Mhm.
So how long will that process take? I mean, we've done it several times over the years, but,
We have, the last time we did it, though, they came to us and said, why don't you increase our rates? In this case, I'm not sure how long it would take. Sean is probably going to be involved in that. He may have a better idea of what something like that looks like. I don't want to give you a time frame because honestly, I don't know.
yeah.
Sean's here.
Some of the franchise fees are at their max week, and we're allowed to charge by law now at the 7%, some are not. And then there's one that's capped at the federal level that covers it. So we're looking at probably 2 to negotiate those out. Last one we did, me and Jeff worked with Pacific Power and actually Stuart Taylor, and it took us about, Jeff, I would say about, 6 to 8 months to get it all the way through.
I was going to say 3. I don't know.
Okay, well, he's optimistic, so, okay.
Yeah.
So it's months, not, it's several months probably. We could do it. I mean, if we can start the process quick, I mean, it doesn't take long to draft the agreement. It's just getting everybody at the table, and I think we can do that pretty fast. So.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I'd point out that when you say to make yourself whole, and make the police department whole is 500,000 and change. That is, we've already taken some of those people away. And we're talking about people off the street, and that's what keeps us safe. I mean, it's just like firefighters how many people are available, how fast. So when you say, is that a layoff or is that not filling a position, it's how many people are there that's important. Yeah, we don't want to hurt people, but bottom line, what can we do with the people less than we have? What could we do with the people available? And if we're talking about not having a street crimes officer running around, I mean, there are various things we're not going to get because of it that we have gotten in the past.
I'm going to touch the third rail. What would happen, if somebody could explain to me what would happen if we froze CARA and only funded what was loaned out at this point? What would be the net sum gain of returning those tax monies that are currently going into CARA and returning them to the general fund? What would be the net sum gain of that?
I do have the answer. I did ask that question to Seth because I knew it was going to be coming up, and I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation for a civic group, and we still have our debt service to have to still fund. So, so what revenues we would have come in and be able to meet our debt requirements is only $200,000 is all we would have extra for the year. So it's not a great solution.
I'd like to see those numbers and where they came from.
I got them from Seth, but he can present them to you.
So that, you're telling me then that CARA's almost played out. It's only got a $200,000 window left of debt that can be encumbered. Is that what you're telling me?
So, no, there still is some reserve funds for some projects, but that's it. You would have to be taking it from, but some of that stuff is designated funds. But that was what I was told.
Well, that is contradiction to what I heard him tell me. We're talking millions of dollars that CARA gets from the system, and we need about $400,000 or $500,000 to pay the bills. Okay, you take the $400,000 or $500,000 out. Once you've done that out of the 3 million or 4 million or whatever it is, and I'm not going to tell you I know that exact number, but what's left then we get a piece of, and it's probably, I don't know, 40% of what's left. So if it was 3 million, it'd be, think 1 billion that we would be able to not take if we didn't do anything with CARA for the rest of the year. If we didn't do any spending from that source. I think you have a good question, and I think we deserve to have a real answer from them. And of course, this body, in its current form, has no authority here, because CARA, of course, is separate. It's the same people in the CARA Budget Committee, but this isn't the CARA Budget Committee right now.
Was Seth here this evening or not?
Seth isn't here. We can probably get that information for you in the morning and email it.
Please.
Well, I guess, I mean, I would like to know, and also, from staff, Peter, what can we do and really be looking at and exploring? You touch base some on some revenue sources, seeking some revenue sources, and that's something we are going to strongly have to be looking at. We are not sustaining services off of the amount of revenues that we're receiving. So our property tax, if you look at your property tax revenue, is $25 million to the city, and its police and fire alone is $35 million. So we always hear from people, they pay plenty of property taxes, and I've always told people it does not fully fund police and fire. And that's reality out there. So in order for us to keep our quality of services in our community is going to take more resources. And what are all those avenues? What can we do to be able to do as soon as possible to be able to bring in more resources to keep our programs as whole as can be?
Yeah, I had mentioned, the utility fee. You could make that, designate that for public safety. But at the same time, you have a public safety levy coming up in about a year from now. So you want to try to see how those two related to each other. We talked a little bit right now about franchise fees. With respect to fire, as I mentioned on Tuesday night, a long-term effort might be creating a fire district, but that wouldn't necessarily raise the money. That would just displace the responsibility to another taxing authority. We are limited, obviously, in property tax. And off the top of my head, I can't think of any other opportunities other than that.
So there wasn't much touch base on planning fees.
Right.
Is that something that we can still explore? The last time we did a study, there was only 11% cost recovery
Right.
on that.
And what Jeff will tell you, I'll take a moment to speak for him and let him speak for himself. That as we talked about on Tuesday night, the planning fees cover the plan reviews. They don't cover the entire cost of running the planning division. But the sense is that the planning division does work that benefits the entire city. Therefore, it should be maintained or supported at least in part by the general fund. But that's certainly a possibility. And do you want to add anything, Jerry?
So if we looked at to be reviewing those, how long of a process would we have before we can implement something?
So we'll be coming forward with our standard annual adjustments based on current council policy. Peter's correct that when we looked at this a year ago, we were recovering our costs that we were spending on reviewing permit applications. As he said, that doesn't mean that we are covering the entire cost of the department. So how much more you want to cover of the department with planning fees would be completely a council choice. You would really just need to decide how much impact you want to have on developers when they're submitting applications and whether that is a deterrent to people submitting applications, which has a negative impact on your revenue as well. There's no crystal ball to tell what impact that will be, but it's not a laborious process. You would just have to decide that you wanted to raise those fees a little bit more and pass a resolution to accomplish that.
Because historically, every time we have done it, we're ready to implement higher fees, then we have several of the builders and, advocates in the audience that says, no, don't raise our fees. And that last time that Greg Byrne did a good analysis and a cost, to come up with a cost recovery program and barely scratch the surface of what was actually approved because we had such pushback from the development community on it, so.
Yeah, I think it depends on how you define cost recovery, whether you believe that it should cover the entire cost of a planning department that serves the city, or whether it's cost recovery is the cost of managing the applications that developers are submitting applications for. The answer depends on how you define cost recovery. Obviously, that's one of a number of fees that somebody pays when they're developing, and we are adjusting fees annually across the board, whether it be SDCs, connection fees, building permits are percentage based, so as costs increase, those fees go up. So we're not staying completely stagnant, but what the council's goals are for cost recovery and what that means to the council could be evaluated and incorporated differently into the fee structure.
I think we need to look at it again.
Ultimately, though, anytime you raise a fee, you are pulling money out of the pocket of the person who's trying to buy the house. Because there is no such thing as a business not recovering that. Business doesn't pay tax, they don't pay fees. They give out money by the hundreds of millions of dollars, but it all goes in the price of the product. So when you want to go buy a house, you're footing the bill.
It should come as no surprise that our dedicated deputy city manager is watching this hearing, this meeting. And through the wonders of modern technology, he's actually sent me the answer to the Kara question. Actually, he sent it to Chris, but he asked me to please let the Budget Committee know that every other government entity will get their full Kara tax dollars if Kara was shut down.
Right.
But the city, their portion of Kara revenues will have to pay all debt responsibilities, and that's why the city would only have about $200,000 left.
Thank you.
You pay the debt before, that's not true. You pay the debt before it's split up. If you just don't take as much money, you take however much you need to do whatever the work it is, whatever bills you have. It's only after that portion that you don't pay that gets split back up to all the taxing districts.
You're talking about under levying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just under levy it.
Under levying.
For a year or 2 years or however long it takes. Anyway.
I'll get the answer to that.
What I'm hearing, I think, is the difference between under levy versus shut it down.
Right,
Yeah, yes,
right.
yes.
I don't think anybody is saying shut it down. You have to pay the bills. You have to end it by paying all the bills that you owe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I'm only looking for $518,000 right now at this point.
Yeah,
I think we can find it.
I think so too.
Yeah.
So what about also, I do know a lot of what we're having to put into additional for reserves. So, and I know we do a lot of it so we can be able to get our GFOA rating. And, but each time, going up a percentage on that and with a higher amount of revenues does increase that. If we kept the reserves at the 5%, what would that save us for
About
this year?
$400,000.
So we could keep police whole with that 400.
Well, I think the second year two of police budget there's about a $1.2 million shortfall.
And that would give us some time to really look at other revenue sources. I really think it's time that our city looks at a utility fee. Almost all community has an additional utility fee. Corvallis has just done an extensive study on theirs, and they are hiring 15 police and firefighters because of their utility fee. Yet, look at it, we don't have one. This is hurting us. We do not have enough revenues to sustain services. We have got to look at either we're going to lower our level of services in our community and impact our quality of life, or we're going to, step up to the plate and try to see and pursue more revenue sources. There's many ways it can be structured. It can be just X amount, $1 by each dollar or two per utility bill. What Corvallis did was by vehicle trip generation. So there's already a model to that, how we factor like the system development charges and a lot of our transportation system, development charges. So it would be every household is usually based on 9 vehicle trips a day. So a utility fee would be every house would pay the same. But your high vehicle trip generation places, say big retailers or higher impact places would pay a lot higher fee. Also, it would end up, every nonprofit would be paying into it, that nonprofits don't pay property taxes. It would also, you could even have it be based on for schools or the colleges, healthcare facilities, all of them that are tax exempt would end up paying into this fee. So It might not be as much of a burden on every household, but it would be a lot of places that, uses and businesses or commercial businesses that do have kind of a high impact also on our city services, they would be paying into it.
No,
So,
the business wouldn't be paying it.
if
The
they're-
customers would be paying it.
If, well, if they're a nonprofit, but some of it would be a
But
pass-through.
still, it comes down to the customers would be paying it.
But do we want to lower our level of services for our community?
Are you thinking of a utility fee that would be enacted by the city council?
It would be.
Yeah, see, I'd be opposed to that because I believe the voters ought to have a say in that. As I mentioned Tuesday, I think we're moving in more to the world of levies and bond measures. I don't think we have enough money in our equipment replacement funds for fire and police. I understand police leases, a majority of their equipment, but in the not too near future, I think we're probably going to have a bond measure just to buy equipment.
But even when you do have a levy, a lot of nonprofits that are out there, they're not paying into the property taxes. There's a lot of tax exempt properties that wouldn't be paying into it. So is that fair to only have people that are paying, property taxes to have to pay into our police and fire levy and all of our police and fire services?
Well-
So it would kind of bring it a little different level of
I look at a lot of those nonprofits as safety catches, safety nets that help keep people from having to be involved with the police department. Hopefully, they won't be involved with the fire department either, but they help those people maintain daily function. And they're not swimming in cash, I can guarantee you. From what I see of United Way fundings and other fundings going to these places, they don't have a lot of cash either. So trying to get blood out of a turnip is really tough. And yeah, you can do it, but it would reduce their amount of service because it would reduce their amount of personnel. And I think we need to think long and hard before we start going down that road. There's another thing I wanted to ask. Has the city, we have done it in the past, do you have any funding for surveying the public? This is the situation we're in, these are some of the causes.
Right. Yeah. We're
sending out this survey so we can get your opinion.
Yeah, you recall we budgeted for a community survey in 2017, and I believe we've got money for outreach along those lines now. And what we're looking at doing is overhauling the way we survey. So no longer would it be a traditional paper survey, and there's also an online version, but it's also available in paper. But there are web-enabled applications now that allow citizens to say where they want to put the next dollar. And they can actually see a graphic depiction of what happens when you remove a dollar from Parks and Recreation and you put it into police. You remove a dollar from the finance department and you put it into IT. And you can actually play with that and see how the impacts of your priorities, what they have on the rest of the city's responsibilities.
Because I think if we're going to make any changes, like Bill said, we may be moving into other forms of levies and whatnot. I think we have to build up the political base for that.
I concur.
And we have to get the buy-in from the taxpayer.
Yes.
And, we can suggest things, but I think we better get that buy-in before we start bringing programs. We already saw what happens when you don't get a lot of buy-in when we tried to build a police and fire station without it. So rather.
And Marilyn Smith and I are working on the beginnings of an outreach campaign like that.
So, Peter, the only concern I would have about an online or automated system is that you're going to alienate several thousand seniors, because a lot of seniors don't have access to or the knowledge to or wherewithal to use a computer or online service. So I'm hoping there will be a paper.
Well, it doesn't, I told you that Marilyn Smith and I are working on the beginnings of this outreach campaign. So it doesn't preclude in-person visits to places where seniors are living and discussions about it.
So that's all I need. I want to know that. I want to make sure that seniors are captured in that demographic when you go out and do the research.
So I do know. I mean, I do think it's something that's going to have to be a strong discussion with our council on bringing in additional revenue sources. And to not think a utility fee is something we should go down that path. I think many people would prefer to have the utility fee than they would to go out and increase the property taxes, because it's going to pick up people that aren't paying for the property taxes. And like with seniors, it's kind of more fair. Why should they take on a higher burden off of property taxes when you have a lot of tax-exempt properties within the city that would be paying this? So I hate to keep bringing up Corvallis here, but they did a big outreach and got a big buy-in with OSU and Samaritan Health to support their utility fee, because they knew how valuable it was to be able to have those services in the city. And our utility fee could be based on a police and fire or public safety type utility fee. Everyone pays. I don't see how a nonprofit could, that is tax exempt, would have any qualms over supporting public safety.
That doesn't solve the problem right now, though, does it? How long would it take to do a utility fee and get it before the voters, like what Bill wants to do? Is that going to solve our problem that we're facing right now?
You don't have to go to the voters for utility fee.
I understand that, but
I think there are enough votes on the city council that would say you have to go
you're
to
going
the
to go
voters.
to the voters.
No. You
So-
can, you're just delaying a process, so.
I understand that, but it's going to be a process. What are we going to do to fix the problem that we have right now? And that's fully fund the police and fire. I think we've solved the fire, but we still have to solve the police, and that's $518,000 approximately. And then next year it's 1.8. So
Realistically, would there be any reason to think that these numbers will change, and if we're sitting here a year from now, that for some reason we have more money than we're projecting, and the second year the biennium isn't as bad?
That's my worry, and that's why I talk about structural problems, because, you know, if you're not making the difficult decisions to actually reduce what you have now, you may end up with a much bigger delta that you have to cover 2 years from now. You can, you know, if you're successful in going to the voters, for example, and getting a utility fee approved, and keeping in mind that there's also the public safety levy coming up as well, which that's another opportunity, is you could make the argument that that should be increased. You know, you'll increase revenues, but I don't know that it'll be enough to counter the effects of a 40% PERS liability.
Well, and I heard the same story on PERS from Russ Allen at the school district. And he was saying the same thing you did, that this increase is going to continue for another 6 years. So, you know, one line, as you've shown, is PERS going up, and the next line is the tax revenue not keeping up, and that gap is widening and widening, and that's over the next 6 years. So now you've got this wide gap, but the next question is, how long does this wide gap continue before the PERS costs start coming down? I haven't heard that, but
About 20 years.
this situation could be a lot more than just 6 years. It's 6 years to our worst-case scenario, and then we continue on in the worst-case scenario for a while.
About 20 years.
So
how
on-
old will Tier 1 people be in 20 years?
Know Tier 1 people who are still working. So
Well, at what age?
in 20 years, they'll be about 75, 80.
I don't think that's right.
Well, I don't mean the bulk of them, I mean
Oh,
the ones who are.
no, you're right. I was talking to
Handicap.
Robert Hayes, a policeman, the other night. He's a Tier 1 guy. He's younger than I am, so yeah, he's going to be around for a few years, Dick.
Yeah.
There's also the possibility, Bill, of property tax going up. We don't know. We estimate conservatively, but I don't think it would be a significant number. But we'll get that information in the December time, November, December, maybe October timeframe, and we'll know better then.
And you probably have some conservative projections at this point.
We
But
do.
again, we're limited as to what we can raise property taxes by previous measures years ago, so hands are kind of tied.
From what I'm hearing then, the bottom line is PERS. If it goes up 33% this year and 40% next year.
It's going up to 33%
Personnel costs.
of personnel of salaries and wages this year. It's an increase from 27% in the current year. I don't know what those numbers are going to look like. I can estimate them, and if you want that information, I can give that to you. They give us a worksheet that we can work off of. But we're not going to know exact numbers until we get them. And there's a lot of things that come into play with what those numbers look like.
I heard utility, franchise fees. Can we is there franchise fees with Comcast and DirecTV and all those as well?
So,
That's
go ahead. So Comcast franchise fees are limited to 5% under federal law,
For household or just 5%, flat 5%?
5% of
Revenue.
sales.
Okay, and that includes the satellite providers like DirecTV as well?
I believe so. Sean would know the technicalities better than I do, but I believe that is true.
It's very complicated. It doesn't sound like it would be, but it is. There's a Cable Franchise Act. It's a federal law that caps cable franchise at 5%. I've actually been doing a little research on it. So Comcast is. And most likely DirecTV, Dish, those would be as well. But then you get into the internet providers, and then it depends on, are they primary internet that have streaming TV, or are they primarily a TV that provide internet, and then can you raise them up to the 7%? So it, depending on who it is, it will depend. Right now, we're pretty confident that we have everybody at the max except for 2 that we're going to be raising theirs to the 7% in the next few months, so.
So on the topic of increasing personnel costs, over the years I've been on the budget committee, and some years there have been changes in the way work's getting done. In some departments, that's been use of technology, so when we had to reduce in a department, and in some areas, things have been contracted out. So other than raising revenues, we have PERS and we have health benefits or benefit package for staff. Can you talk a little bit about where we're at? I know we have multiple plans, but where we're at as far as the percentage of premium paid by the city and co-pays and that sort of thing. We've made some changes over the years.
So, right,
Closer.
a little closer. Right now, the city pays 96% of premiums and employees pay 4% for AFSCME, non-bargaining, and fire. Fire is going up to 5%, I believe, in 2020. AFSCME and non-bargaining will go up also to 5%, and police is paying 5% right now.
That's of the family.
It's all across the
whole-
board, yeah,
okay.
regardless of which status you are.
Okay. And
How many
co-pay?
dollars does that amount to?
Depending on the group, of which insurance you're at, I believe, it's about $89 for 4% right now, for family. And I can't remember fires. It's not quite, it's about the same, maybe 100, somewhere around there, yeah.
I'm not worried about that. I mean, how many dollars does the city have to pay?
Total.
Total.
800,000.
I can't say I can answer that right off the top of my head. But I can get it for you.
Okay.
We don't know.
We do know. I can get that number. I don't have it off the top of my head, what the city's paying for total cost.
Can you give me a round guess estimate?
Probably around just over 5 million would be my
5
guess a
million.
year.
So if we ask the employees to pay part of that, maybe it could be.
They do
Three
pay, a portion, 5% of the
Yeah,
total.
How about if we got them to pay 10% or 20%?
Again, it'd be negotiated. You know, it's something we'd have to negotiate with the unions. So when we went to the higher deductible plan back in 2017 and 18 for AFSCME, non-bargaining, and police, we kept that percent where it was at 96.4. And then as we moved into the VEBA and the dollars that are being contributed to their VEBA, we asked them to add to that the additional percent. And just to give you, I know the question was asked previously at a different meeting, but looking up what we pay in the VEBA, we contribute $600,000 to the VEBA for all three of those groups. When we went to this higher deductible plan, we saved $1.2 million between everyone, and we shared half of that with the groups through the VEBA. The city is still ahead by about $500,000 to $600,000, even though we contribute to the VEBA, to where we would be higher deductible plan.
Any other benefits that people, that we might not be expecting that would be different than what maybe we're seeing in our own private plans or business plans?
I don't think so. What I would say is we're comparable with other jurisdictions that are close in our population or that we would be including in our comparisons. I don't think that we are. We stick with one plan to make it simple and to really be able to manage. Offering different plans, other entities do a lot of that, but the cost, there's not a cost savings necessarily, it's just about offering families a variety of coverage that meets their needs. We try to do that with one plan, basically.
Okay. Well,
When you start considering things like this, you have to consider what's that going to do to the city's ability to attract the best and brightest folks that are available out there. You start making it a lot harder, and you end up more positions going unfilled because they can find better terms in other cities and other municipalities. So you do have to consider that too.
So we'll have a problem with that, in that if the private sector knew what the benefits they had here at the city, they take less money to have the benefits because of the cost of medical. I sell insurance. I looked at the budget, the thing we did with AFSCME, and a family of four was paying, the city, they were paying like $158, and the city was paying like $1,500. Okay, it was actually more than that. A single person, 67-year-old female in this city pays more for Medicare than a family of four that works for this city. So for me, there are people that would leave private sector jobs just to get the health benefits compared to what they're paying for health benefits in the private sector. So that's best and brightest would come to fill those jobs. Even if you raise it to 10% or 15%, that's still way less than what they're paying in the private sector.
But what I'm talking about are police and fire, which take a lot of training, a lot of other things other than just being able to.
I didn't hear that part. I just heard city employees, so that's what.
Well, police and fire are the majority of those folks. And yes, you're right, I didn't say police and fire.
So I'm just speaking of what I read for as the negotiations with the city on bargaining.
Right.
and Danette, one more question. Do we offer any kind of payment to the employee if their spouse opts out of coverage?
We do not. Actually, what we do here at the City of Albany is we require that all employees and their families participate in insurance. And the reason we do that, if I can stay at a high level with regards to insurance, and what we're doing is we're covering risk. We know that 18% of our employees and participants are what truly are costing the claims that we have. About anywhere from 15-18% are what the claims are each year, who carry them. The rest are healthy. And so what we're really covering is that premium, or I'm sorry, the increase or claims cost to us, because the city's insurance premiums are based on actual claims. We have 1,000 participants. So each year when we have an increase like this increase that we have this year, it's really based on our claims that we've had this last year. We've had a lot of illnesses this last year. We've had a lot of good years also over the last 10 years. We've ebbed and flowed, but insurance is cyclical. And so the illnesses are going to come eventually, and we've had a lot, and that's why you see the 17.8% increase this year. But we've had a lot of good, we've had -2 years that we actually saw those decreases because our increases are based on our actual claims. So when we have everyone participate, what we're really doing is getting, covering those who are sick, and the others are receiving the benefit of the coverage, even though they may not need it. But it's not increasing our costs by doing that. We just pay our claims year by year.
It's pretty comparable to, my husband's at Oregon State, so cost-wise, their plan's very different. And I don't think it's quite as good a coverage, and it doesn't have the high deductible feature in it. But as far as what they're paying for the employee and what their cost is, and it's very inexpensive for a spouse to be on the plan. So I see it's similar there. I've only worked for one private employer that covered the whole family, and it was a Spanish-owned company, and so it came out of their culture and history of doing that in Spain. But at my employer, we're probably less than half the cost, but we only cover the employee, not the spouse and family. And our plan is, it's a 80-20 coverage plan with a $1,000 deductible. Yeah. And so on the other tact of so managing the number of FTEs in the city, so any ongoing opportunities or things being looked at in any of the parts of the city as far as increasing contracting of any function or expected implementation of technologies that would reduce any FTE?
Well, I would invite any director to comment on that, but what we, as an organization, will undertake in the coming months is a bottom-up review to look at how we might perform certain functions better, how we might collaborate more than we already do with outside agencies, how we might use technology to kind of enhance the capability or the capacity that we have. So, and that would be something from the deck plate level, from the bottom level, hence the name bottom-up review. So, the city did something like that in 2010, shortly after the last recession, and I was forwarded the notes from that, and there's a lot of interesting thoughts in there as well.
Okay.
But I can't give you right now a specific example of, for instance, leveraging technology to reduce FTE.
I think I might be able to give you an
Great.
example.
Okay.
So in finance, we're going to a new ERP system, and I have an accounting supervisor position that's currently vacant, but we're going to freeze it for now until we see what Munis can do for us. If we're able to get by without the same level of accountant, we may underfill that to save some money. And right now, we just don't know yet what that's going to look like, so we're just waiting. But as of right now, I'm anticipating underfilling it.
Bessie had asked for some information. I think she got part of it, but I wasn't sure what you were going after with your question about managers and supervisors and staffing reporting to each position. Did you get what you wanted there?
Pretty much. Sometimes it's a top-heavy, where you have a supervisor who is supervising 1 or 2, and then somebody else is doing maybe 6 or something like that. And so I was just wondering if, instead of going after, that's not a good phrase, looking at the lower employees, that maybe middle management or something could, be cut. I mean, just an example, when I worked for the county, we had a chief appraiser, and then we had another supervisor that didn't need to be there because the chief appraiser supervised everybody anyway. And so this guy was a manager, supervisor, taking up funding for, you know, the other workers. And so this is what I'm looking at is sometimes you don't need as many supervisors as you have.
So
I mean,
you'll-
that's,
Yeah.
and that's common.
Sure, and maybe you'll recall from Tuesday night, we talked about the Parks and Recreation Department staffing being reduced to 25 FTE. One of the implications of doing that is that it correspondingly increases the number of direct reports for the remaining supervisors. So that is in effect flattening the organization. So,
And I think the same thing would apply to the finance department, especially if we don't fill that accounting supervisor position. I will take on the supervisory functionality for the two people that reported to Ann. And so then, if we had an accountant, then they would report to JC. So again, we're not sure yet what we need, but that's what we're anticipating.
And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is to look at the whole picture rather than, okay, let's lay off some police officers and say, you know, maybe there's some middle management there that doesn't need to be, you know, looking for anything. Now, I did notice something. Central services went up a lot this year. It seems like everywhere. And I apologize for not remembering this, but what does central services all cover?
So central services covers finance, it covers HR, it covers city manager's office. It also, we have monies coming in for central services to go to like a building, the maintenance, you know, city maintenance. And then also we're establishing some reserves for like the HVAC system in City Hall. So we're wanting to save money for that each year so that when it finally goes down, we'll have, or maybe it doesn't have to go down, but we can replace it without having a huge burden at that time. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that, you know, personnel costs are going up across all departments, and it includes central services also. Also, we are in the second year, for example, in finance of the Munis implementation. We're expecting that we're supposed to go live with our HR and payroll system in July, and then UB, which is in Public Works, will go live with it, I believe, July 1st of next year. And so we do have some of those continuing costs associated with that. So we're, in the second year of finance, you'll see there's a drop in both contractual services. We have some temps that are helping us out, and then also in some of the other costs.
Thank you.
So there were also some requests for information about city-owned properties across the city, and some comments, I think, made at previous meetings about, you know, not wanting to sell things off to get one-time funds to fix something for 1 year and not have it. But with setting that aside, can you talk to us a little bit about the kind of the management of the city's inventory of property? I know we get property in various ways. When do we ever sell it? Is there anything in the current inventory that is known to not have a planned need for that?
Well, I'd ask Jeff Blaine to talk about property that remains to be sold, and then perhaps Ed Hodney as well.
There's a number of examples we could point to. Public Works is obviously a large property holder, but we're in the process, the city as a whole is in the process of selling a number of properties referred to as the Brandis properties east of I-5, and those monies are going back into economic development account. Public Works has a couple other small parcels that can be sold. One, you know, we're talking like $60,000, $80,000 type of properties, but we have a large volume that are, when you look at a map, it looks like, oh wow, there's a lot of property there that maybe we could sell that. As far as Public Works is concerned, A lot of that's pump stations, reservoirs, different things throughout town to serve the different utilities. A lot of park and open space and those types of things, but Chris probably has some too.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, we inherited some property, we received some property from Pacific Power when we purchased the water system that could be disposed of, or other agreements could be made. There's one in Lebanon right now that we're looking at. There's also a lot of other tiny bits of properties, and Ed Hodney and I have been trying to get a handle on all of those, and do we need them, little pieces of right-of-way or little strips here and there, some of which were purchased for future needs, future trails, future right-of-way, but others we're not quite sure what the purpose is. So that's a task we've tried to take on, and we'll be working on still. I don't think any of them are large money sources, but what they would do is free up some ongoing maintenance work that the neighbor calls, and it's just more to keep up with the blackberry cutting and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So it does create a cost to the organization that would be saved if we could transfer that property. So that's a task we're looking at.
I'm not sure that I'll add much more of value to Jeff and Chris. I think with specifically related to parks, properties are in possession for a reason. What you're looking for when you acquire a piece of property for parks is you're trying to achieve a certain service level. And so if the city at any point decides it wants to lower the service level, that does open up your option to dispose of property. The irony is that a lot of our properties are in the floodplain and designated open space and can't be developed for any other purpose, which means that they're not of much value on the market. Roughly half of our park system is open space and floodplain. So that's a factor that maybe reduces some of your opportunity if you just look at the entire system of 900 acres. And then the other factor that predates me by a whole long way is that back in the 70s, and especially the 70s, but into the 80s, a lot of our current properties were purchased with federal money, sometimes for a couple of $1,000s, but that purchase with federal funds through a federal grant program obligates us in perpetuity to maintain it. Or we have to go through a process, an expensive process sometimes. We've done that in the past, by the way, just over the last few years, to get federal approval to get rid of one piece of property, which then requires that we replace that property we just got rid of for other purposes with another piece of property. So it's kind of a chasing your tail prospect. That said, then you probably have a few properties left in the system that don't have those strings attached to them. So it's something that it's worth looking at. The council especially will remember that over the years I brought several pieces of property to the city council to request to sell them. And we have sold several properties in the 15 plus years that I've been here.
Thornton Lake?
We haven't sold that one yet.
Right, could you give us the status?
Grant funds.
So the question on status.
Status, one, is it unable to be used other than in the floodplain, whatever?
So Thornton Lake is not in the floodplain.
Okay.
So, and you will recall that the property was purchased at the request or at the direction of the city council back then. Direction that I received was go buy this property, and we secured a $600,000 grant from state parks to pay for part of the purchase price. The rest of it came from park SDCs and some donation funds as well. So the string that's attached to Thornton Lake, the only real string that's attached to Thornton Lake is the state grant that was provided. And we would have to resolve that issue probably by paying the state grant back, about $600,000. So something that you may want to take a look at, but it will be a complicated and expensive proposition to dispose of that property. But that said, anything is technically possible.
Thank you. We could harvest all the turtles.
Questions, topics that you want, information you want to request of staff before our next meeting?
I do have one for our library aficionado. Libraries generally are becoming more and more and more and more electronic. Do you see a time in what kind of distant future when it will be normal for someone to go in and instead of ask for a book, ask for a download? Something like that. Brings up South Shore Elementary. They're not using books generally. They use some, but primarily they're using iPads. You know, you go from here to 10 years from now, if that's what they're doing, we're going to be having a nice place where I and people like me who like to have paper books will go, yeah, I want a paper book, but a lot of the population will be saying, why do I want to have that thing? I'll do it on my whatever.
Okay, the future history of the library in the world. Let me see how much time do I have. You know, it's a good question. We're finding at this point, and I've talked over the years, as you know, that it's both and electronic use is increasing. Libraries are responding to, public libraries are responding to that by, for instance, we don't spend money on quick reference sources. If you come in and say, what's the capital of Massachusetts, which is my great town of Boston, we don't look that up in a book anymore. So some of these print resources, deleting those from collections and lend them, it's perfect partnership with technology. So we've been doing that for a number of years. I would not use South Shore as an example in that school libraries across the country are only libraries in name, and so I would say in that case that's an act of desperation. There are no staffed professional school media specialists in any of, maybe in 2 of our 20+ schools. They have virtually no book budgets. That's not because they want to adopt or adapt technology. It's just, it's a tough situation. So we're finding a bit of both and we, there is that element that's one of the glories of the public library, and that is there are people who just can't afford the gizmos, and there are some things that print, as you said, a lot of us do prefer print. So it's a good question. It's gonna be interesting, and we kind of adjust as we go. We provide databases, online resources, and things, and cut out print where we can. So that's, I don't know if that helps.
The South Shore, it's not that their library that I'm talking about. It's in the classroom. They have stopped using a lot of the books they used to use, and it now goes just to iPads. Which, while I don't know how much that's happening throughout the system, at Kiwanis we had some teachers come in and give us the information. Again, that was the impetus for the question.
That's a really good question, and all I can respond to is the 1,000 people a day who come into the library, a lot of them for what's left of the physical collection, and I think as we go forward, we'll adjust accordingly. And again, we don't care if they read the back of tea leaves as long as they're reading,
long as
you
they're
know.
reading,
And we support,
Second question. We have a book sharing system with other libraries throughout the system. Do we seem to get back as many books as we produce to them? Or because we're probably the biggest library in the area, do we spend a lot more, or send a lot more books out than we get back? And I don't mean we don't get our own back, I mean they send to us.
you know, I'll bring those stats up to the day next week. Just because we have, you know, Lion Share is putting it minimally the largest collection in users. In fact, we actually borrow more books. But, you know, percentage-wise, say, versus a small collection in Sweet Home or Lebanon, it's unbelievably beneficial for those smaller libraries. But our patrons, it's a significant, it's a solid number to the good for our patrons. So, and we don't, you know, it's a few years into it, barely a hitch. You know, no, we're not losing stuff. All the users, your constituents as well as the other libraries are pretty happy with having that broader access to materials.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
On the library
Yeah, on the library. When a school goes to using iPads, yes, they're not paying for textbooks, but they are paying licenses fees, which approach the cost of textbooks.
Well, it may well. However, you can get a little chip that has 50 books on it.
Mhm.
You don't need the space anymore. You don't need the people to categorize it anymore. You know, there are a number of things. You may well have other expenses and other needs because of technology. But that technology means they can plug something in or plug their machine in and download. And, you know, you could put every book in the world in this room pretty easy if it was done electronically. It's just things are changing.
Definitely.
How fast it happens, I don't know. But we need to be with it, not behind it.
So over the last week or so, as I was making some notes about, you know, what I've heard other citizens say this year and what I think myself, what I'd like to see the city provide. And well, you know, when I look at parks, we have some well-used parks, you know, at Timberland, all the different things that are going on out there. My husband drives all the way from North Albany over there to use that park for certain things, including the dog park. And of course, you want your smaller neighborhood parks that people can just walk to. But when we have them and we can't either build them up or maintain them or keep them safe, you know, then they are just a cost. There's some cost to maintaining them. I used to walk from Taquina Landing all the way along the trail along the river with my dog early in the morning. Don't do that anymore. And I used to take all my 7 nieces and nephew on that walk along there and on the other side of the river, and just too many things that we ran into, sketchy situations. You go to the Saturday market and get your hot cocoa and go park at Taquina Landing, and it starts out fine. There's just a couple guys with bikes, and then there's a pack of guys with way too many bikes that they could ride, and my grandniece is saying, "What are those boys doing?" And here, the police did come rolling in, and whatever was going on, cars were pulling up, coming and going. You know, it's sad when you can't use the places that we have in those situations. As far as the situation with the personnel costs, and and I support all of the ideas I'm hearing about, revenue sources, but they're only going to keep up so much with the PERS situation. So when I think of, obviously you have to have your fire and police services there for us to be able to thrive and make use of everything. But I am a strong supporter and user of the parks, the library, the senior center. So I think we just have to keep thinking about how we provide that as a community, that there aren't other, especially those things where there's no one else in town providing that place for the population. So whether it's a senior center or a community center that also has a library inside of it, whatever you have to do to make it more efficient and affordable, but Albany wouldn't be much of a city without its parks and all the programs and concerts and festivals that are provided there. I see other cities that maybe they have a great festival that runs a few years, it's a private organization and falls apart for whatever reason, and
Timber Carnival.
And that's gone. Timber Carnival, Fall Festival in Corvallis has kind of ebbed and flowed. And Da Vinci Days, yeah, that sort of thing. So I do see a role for the city there, and I think that those things are really valuable. And yet, we will have some hard choices when it comes to FTE and funding that. So we may need to, where possible, reduce some of the footprint of some of those programs.
To that point, Takina Kiwanis is providing funds for Boys and Girls Club for basically playground equipment. And I asked them, why is it? Why don't you just take the kids over to the park? And your words were exactly what they said. It's, well, there are those sketchy people that made them afraid. And that was just enough that with the added expense of moving people over there, they decided, no, let's keep them close. So I think your point is, I think is well brought forth, that we need to do a good job at the things we're doing, and if we are overloaded someplace, we need to determine whether or not the footprint's too big. What's the most efficient size of the footprint, or whatever that is.
Bessie?
Yeah. Chief Radner, I was looking at the SAFER grant, and I see it's ending September 30th of 2020. Now, how is that going to affect, I mean, is it renewable? Is it something you have to apply for? Is it like a iffy, or what's going to happen then?
Yes, that's correct. It will expire September 30th of 2020. It potentially could be requested again. It's not really renewable, but we could go through the application process again and potentially receive it a third time. This is our second time receiving it, so that's always an option. Obviously, that's not completely within our control. It has to go through a grant review process. We are currently funding 6 positions as part of that SAFER grant. And with the current fire department budget that's been presented, 3 of those positions would continue. The 3 would then be those 3 frozen positions from that.
Okay, all right, thanks. Yeah.
Chief, could you address how much that grant provides the city in the first year, second year, and third year?
Sure. It's the current setup of it is a 3-year grant. The current setup is 75% provided by the federal government, by FEMA, 25% city. Second year is the same thing, 75-25. And the third year, then it flips to 65% city funded, 35% FEMA funded.
Dollar volume.
Say it again?
How much dollar volume?
Oh, the total grant, if I remember correctly, was right at about 1.2 million.
So
I'd have to go back and look for sure, but
400 a year.
yeah.
531.
But then those positions in subsequent years are entirely city-funded then, correct?
Correct. To continue them beyond the grant, they would be
So
fully.
once when you accept that grant, you're obligating yourself for the long term for funding those positions, right?
Right. I mean, there's no requirement that you have to continue past the end of the grant. Obviously, that's their goal by phasing the grant the way they do.
Sure.
But once you get to the end of the 3 years, you don't have to. Obviously, our desire is that we continue those positions because they become part of our staffing.
Well, yes. And can you also tell me, with the contracting in Millersburg, has that made any difference in where we used to contract for, yeah, we had some firefighters, how can I say it? basically, how has it affected your budget by taking that on? I mean, they're paying us, of course, but then, did we gain any money by doing that, or did we lose? Because the rural fire department was covering it before, but we had some that were covered. So I just wondered, what difference does that make? Any?
It's really probably cost neutral, because you're right that the Albany Rural Fire Protection District was covering it initially. Now the city of Millersburg is covering all 9 of those positions, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So they're covering the cost of that. The station, obviously, they paid for, and the cost of getting those individuals up and running were paid for by the city of Millersburg. So realistically, it hasn't necessarily generated a whole lot of revenue for the city. Part of our agreement with them, with the city of Millersburg, is that they would provide $35,000 a year toward equipment replacement, just because we have equipment out there. So we're seeing a little bit of positive revenue from that, but realistically, they're covering the costs out there.
Okay, great, thanks.
Alex?
So I just want, the work that we did last night, does that cover things after, when these grants run out?
Yes, that would cover then 3 of those 6 positions. So 3 of the positions were freezing. 2 are currently frozen, and we would not fill those positions. And then the third one is, I believe I have an opening coming up due to retirement in the first portion of the biennium. And so all 3 of those would then be frozen. But the 3 of the 6 safer positions would be funded through the work we did last night, yes.
Thank you very much.
So I had spoken with you about some summaries that we had last year in the book, and I don't know if you've made any progress on those, but.
We have. We're in the process of reviewing those before we hand those out.
Okay.
I'm hoping to have those to you either tomorrow by email or Monday.
Okay. And so they were just some of the general fund and the financial summaries overall to kind of give you that big picture of how things are rolling
We ran
up
out of
together.
time doing it this year, just with the conversion to munis and then also to a biennial budget. I have somebody who has linked everything in our system, but we just, like I said, we need to review to make sure that the numbers are correct. It looks like maybe we found a couple things that were not being pulled in correctly. So we'll review those and get those out to you.
Okay.
Sharon. So Gina, on the risk management fund, on
Yes.
page 283, so it says that we need to be maintained with a working balance of up to $2 million.
And we don't have that right now. We're working to rebuild that reserve.
Okay, because we did put some of the Pepsi proceed money of $1 million into that years back. That was to be able to keep us up whole. So I'm seeing the beginning balance is going to be 573.
So one of the problems that we had, not this, I'm trying to think, fiscal year 18, we had an issue where we weren't pulling enough PERS from departments. And we were about $400,000 short. And so we ended up taking a loan from I'll call it a loan, from risk management to make that payment. We are hoping to, as we continue to get, so part of our PERS rate, I will tell you, is that we are trying to, the PERS rate covers the amount that we have to pay to the state. It also covers our debt service for PERS, our pension obligation bonds. It also covers a small amount, a small percentage to build a PERS reserve so that maybe we can flatten out some of these increases in the future. There is a PERS reserve in this risk management fund now. It's not funded yet, but we will be moving money back in there as we have extras. As we have extra funds coming in from departments. It hasn't happened yet, but we are anticipating that will occur. We're also in the process of building that risk management reserve back up.
Okay, thank you. So on the settlement projects, on page 285. So you're going to
Yes.
be basically kind of deleting out that fund,
We
and you're
have-
transferring the 3 million into economic development fund,
That is correct.
okay?
Now, the 3 million, I will tell you, that may not necessarily be the fund balance. We just are budgeting for that so that we, in case we get a lot of money in, we don't have to reappropriate. So the amount that will get transferred will be the amount that what our beginning fund balance is for the next fiscal year.
So since it's going, the 3 million then, into the economic development opportunity fund, can we at least put that down as, instead of basically, it's in here as a fund that can be kind of a reserve type infrastructure projects or partnerships, can it still be just used for part of that 12% we need for reserves to be able to, reach our obligations over GFOA? Are these numbers factored into that?
The numbers that are, so reserves do count. Usually we're looking at contingencies, which are a percentage of operating reserves. It kind of depends on what the reserves are for. I mean, reserves are always good, having money on hand, but if it's just an operating reserve, I'm not sure that we really would want to count that, because it's probably going to be used for something, or potentially could be used for something. I think we have some small operation reserves in our public works funds, but they're relatively small amounts.
Well, I mean, I'm wondering if we could, for the amount of increase of the reserves for this year up to 362,000, just shift it from that fund into our, contingency fund then, so then we'd be able to help out the police department with that.
Well, I guess my question.
It would still be, basically, it's kind of a paper trail. It's from one reserve really to another.
My question would be this. So if we were to move monies from one reserve to another, unless we were truly planning on making that part of a reserve, what we're really doing is using one-time funds to pay for operating expenses.
Well, I mean, I would hope the 3 million that we do have.
We don't,
in our
so first of all, we
economic
don't have 3 million. Okay, we
You
just
know.
budgeted that in case we had any, I don't remember what the amount is right now. It's probably, it's probably at 1.6 or so. But we don't know if we're going to get some money in from the Brandis properties. We don't know how that's going to be coming in, so we just wanted to budget 3 million just in case.
Well, it looks like year-to-date, you have 2.2 million in the beginning balance in the settlement projects.
But we've also spent, so
Just
the.
183, so you should have 2 million then.
Not necessarily, remember, these numbers only go up to December of 2018. I can check and see what we're at right now, but this isn't the most accurate number. We still need to upload the other months into Munis.
I mean, I would just hope we would never spend all of the, always have a little bit of settlement proceeds, so if it's 362,000 and just keep over in a contingency, at least that keeps 362,000, so.
That would be a decision for council to make. I think right now, this has been directed to go towards economic development. Some of the money that should be coming in from the Brandis property will go here into the new Economic Opportunity Fund, Economic Development Opportunity Fund. And so where that money is coming from is at one point, the risk management, Risk Management Fund made a loan to the Capital Projects Fund. So as money is coming in from the LIDs that are associated with Brandis, where Brandis is and those LIDs, the money comes into the Capital Projects Fund and then gets transferred over to the Risk Management Fund to pay off that debt. Once that debt is satisfied, then the additional funding we're planning to put into a reserve. But if we're just transferring reserves, if we move this money over to our general fund contingency, we're basically using one-time monies to fund operations, because what we're freeing up we're not going to get back. And so, if the point is to continue with the contingency in our general fund, then this isn't a direction that we would want to take. If we were moving the money to stay over there permanently, then that would be fine. But if it's just to free up other money, then it's in effect using, not for the purpose of establishing a contingency.
Jorge again.
You got mad.
Because
Jorge
the other words
indicates
you're
that
saying,
about,
you could totally wipe out the whole settlement proceeds
do that.
funds then.
And again,
That would at
that
least
would be
leave
council's
some,
decision.
the way say it's staying in a contingency.
That's what I said.
So Jorge is indicating that about 1.5 of that sum is committed for LBCC, and about 700,000 for Stack Metallurgical, you remember, which council is considering now to provide as a loan.
Pretty much used.
Seth, did you have something to say?
Sean.
Sean?
Sorry, Sean.
The names have changed to protect the.
Oh, here we go. And I would have to confirm with Seth, actually, about what I'm going to say. But the settlement proceeds, if you remember, there's still a potential of $5 million that is still out there that the city is owed on that settlement once that property is to be sold. I think it was early last year that some people came in and asked the council to consider waiving that $5 million or reducing that $5 million. That didn't happen. That property was originally scheduled to close at the end of last year. It did not happen, and I'd have to ask Seth what the status of that is. But there's a potential there that the city could get some money back from that up to $5 million. So.
It's supposed to be for economic development.
Right.
Well, yeah, but we also said we could waive that if part of the deal was that they sell the property at cheaper rate, we would forego our $5 million if we felt there was a good economic interest there, and jobs for the city and so forth. So there's no guarantee we'll ever see $5 million.
Right. It's in the agreement where it's up to council. It's their discretion to do it.
Bessie?
If the mayor's done.
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
finish, okay. I know in the past, the explanation for this, I'm talking about beginning balances for the departments. They're pretty much the same, and then by the time you get done, I realize the city does it where you don't put the department down to zero and start fresh with a new budget. But some of these beginning balances are quite high, and, it wouldn't take much to adjust the beginning balances, somehow tweak it to where we could get the $500,000 we need for the police department.
But Bessie, part of the problem is that some of these beginning balances are in other funds, and those revenues are restricted to those funds. We can't cross, we have individual silos, we can't cross that. So depending on which fund you're looking at, we may not be able to do something like
Sure,
that.
and I understand Public Works is its own thing. But
Right, Parks is its own, any of the special revenue funds are their own areas.
But, okay, so which are funded by general funds that we could maybe?
So general fund is the programs, fire, police, planning, library, municipal court.
Okay. Parks get some general fund, don't they?
Parks gets some general fund, but they are a special revenue fund. We can't pull money from their revenues.
Yes.
To move over.
Right, no. I just think that the beginning balances are really high in some of the departments. And they just go across the board. It's like you start here and you end there.
Well,
so
part of
you
it-
begin the same place.
So part of that too, I think Ed can probably speak on this a little, easier than I can, but I know in Parks, we are trying to carry forward a beginning balance because we're trying to offset some of those costs in future years. So we need to have a beginning balance. So that beginning balance, and then, the difference gets put into a reserve. beginning balance is the revenues minus the expenditures from the prior year, is what the beginning balance is for the next year, the current year. We want to have a beginning balance moving forward so that we can, if we have something that comes up, if we have a shortage, that we can use that money to help fund what we need to fund. And if you look at parks, if I remember correctly, it's decreasing as you go, because they're starting to use that money for operations.
Yeah. And then, one other question about planning. I noticed that the contractual services from 19 to 20 went up about 166,000. I just wondered why the big increase?
Yeah, that's the projects that council specifically authorized for the buildable lands inventory, housing
Darn
needs
council,
analysis,
sorry.
and the economic opportunities analysis. So those are monies that were allocated specifically to planning. That's just where projects are funded in the planning budget, is out of that contractual service line. So I don't have anything more to say, that's the answer.
Yeah, so what is the service that we're contracting? I'm sorry, I'm just missing.
Completion
one
of a
little piece
buildable
here.
lands inventory, a housing needs analysis, and an economic opportunities analysis.
Oh, okay. So it's a one-time thing, basically?
Yes.
All right, that helps. All right, thank you.
Yep.
And so is any of our fees based on helping to support that? That we get off of permit fees?
Yeah.
Since it
No,
is.
the permit fees are for current planning activities, and it's covering the costs of conducting the current planning activities, the fees that we're collecting now. So long-range planning activities are something that is funded outside of the fee structure.
Maybe
and
that's something we should look at, because other words, we wouldn't need to be doing those long-range planning if it wasn't for the development coming in to take up the inventory for the need to look at our, housing needs analysis and buildable lands inventory. That's what all drives that study. So, some thoughts.
The fact that we don't know it,
about cost recovery. Mhm.
Looking at every dime in the couch.
Well, it's something we.
Thanks for it.
Discussing.
He's answering you.
Questions?
God, there's gotta be some more.
Let me know when we get to the dumb looks portion, so we can,
You're welcome.
yeah. No.
Oh, it's silence.
I think we're questioned out.
I'm still looking.
All right. If there's no more discussion for tonight, then any other business? And then we will continue meeting on May 14th.
Actually, can I ask for, I know that there had been several comments that had to do with funding police for this upcoming year, and I would like to get direction on what we need to do. I can prepare those sheets if I can get that.
Not sure if we arrived anywhere.
The only thing I see is the 2 franchise fees to raise them up to the 350, start that process, and shift the reserves so we can keep police whole. What I'd like to see.
I'd like to find the $518,000 that he needs to be whole.
I think you have to find it someplace else. It was, Sean mentioned it could take 6 to 8 months, Jeff said 3, to do anything with the franchise fees. I mean, unless there's some plan to borrow the money from the Pepsi settlement and pay it back once the franchise fees go up, but that's a gamble. It may or may not go up.
Sean and I are shooting from the hip, too, so if that's something you want to pursue, maybe we could come report back with a tighter evaluation of the time frame, and we can actually go back and look at the budget numbers and see what the real number is that we would anticipate collecting, if that's something council is interested in pursuing.
Sure, but as a strategy, I think that's more appropriate for 2021 than it is this year.
I think, from my point of view, I don't want to go backwards and then have to turn around and train new police officers
Yeah.
that cost thousands of dollars. I would rather retain I'd rather retain what we have now instead of going backwards. So if we can find that 518, I'd really like to see if we can find it.
Well,
Me too.
if you can't find it,
Say what?
if you can't find the $518,000, I mean, we need to put our big boy pants on.
That's correct.
I mean, at some point, a lady the other night made the point, we shouldn't fight one group against another group, but that's what we're doing. That's what our job is. If we can't come up with the money, we need to decide what's the most important. I mean, at some point, what's more important, having that many police officers on the street or some other thing that we do? We either need to come up with the money or make that decision.
And I will say, if we really want to be able to keep things whole, we should not be putting just, I feel like we're putting the blinders on about really pursuing that utility fee. $2 a month on every user would be about $500,000. So put it for public safety, but I really think it's something we should look at instead of just, oh, better start cutting. I worry about what this will do to our community to lower our level of service. We are not to the level we should even be for our size of our community. So at times, it takes the tough choices to make. We've got to do what's best for the community.
Bessie?
Change the leadership in Salem. That would benefit our community.
Yeah. I was just wondering, what is the total of the funds for the outside agencies, do you know?
So in the first year, we are reducing the amounts that we are sending to the Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA by half. In the second year, we're totally eliminating those. We are keeping our contribution to the CAPS program because they really do provide a resource that we don't have. So I think it's going to be about, I think that one is 23,000-ish a year.
Not enough. See, that's the thing, you know, you cut something and it's not enough, but,
Well, and those two cuts are already in this budget that you just mentioned.
yeah,
Boys and Girls Club and YMCA.
I know. But I agree, I think we need to keep the police department whole, because like Mike said, I don't want, it's kind of like you take one step forward and 3 steps back when you have to retrain them, and then you don't have them on the street anyway. So, yeah, I think so too. Got to find some way to do it.
I'd like to hear more about that. I mean, I had a conversation with Captain Lyles last night, and please defend yourself. Don't let me put words in your mouth. But I was under the impression that there's 3 positions that are currently vacant, that this budget would not allow us to fill. And then there would be 1 lieutenant, if they did retire, would not be, it would be frozen. But that's assuming that he does retire. So am I accurate, and is there any update on that?
No, that's right.
So in my conversation with Captain Lyles, I came away with the impression that our bigger problem is 2021.
That's correct, because kind of where we're going to be is we use a lot of those positions. I've got about 4 positions and 1 traffic officer which I haven't been able to fill because I can't get enough people hired and trained to keep up with attrition. So the problem we're going to have is we got a lot of retirements coming up, especially in the upper staff level. So we're going to have a hard time promoting or moving anybody up because I won't have anybody able to cover patrol because it takes a year to hire and train somebody. So we normally have 4 positions unassigned to anything. Right now, 3 of those positions are frozen. So I've got a captain who's leaving, and then next year I got 2 lieutenants who are most likely leaving, and I probably got at least 1 officer, and I got other people who are eligible to retire. So it's only take a few people to leave, then I'm pulling from detectives, I'm pulling everywhere else to go into patrol to cover. So when you have a major call out, I'm not going to have people that's going to be able to respond to it. So that's the situation we're going to be in.
Right.
You know, we're already short-staffed as it is, and then by freezing all these positions, it's just going to make it worse. And I've said, you know, and I've showed the numbers, and I've showed the amount of calls we take, you know, we should be around 69, 70 officers, but we're at 65 right now. And with 3 positions frozen, I'm down to 62. And I just had a dispatcher leave, and I froze that position also. So, because I'm not sure where the budget's gonna lie. But it takes us a while, even dispatchers, by the time I hire somebody, get them through background, that's about a 3-month process, and then I gotta train them. That's about another 4-month process. So they're not as long as a police officer, but it takes a while. Then I have more rotation through dispatch than I usually do through the police officers. So we've never been fully staffed in dispatch since I've been here. Because by the time we get somebody in the door, I got somebody leaving. And that's just the nature of how it's worked. So without having some of these other positions in there, a year from now, right now we're doing okay. A year from now, we're really going to be hurting. And it's going to come to a point where you're going to call and ask for somebody to respond to the type of call. We're going to have to cut down the level of service because we won't be able to keep up with the calls for service. So if you have a minor theft or if you have a non-injury accident, stuff like that, or even an alarm call, we may say, if you don't see anything, if you see an issue, call us. If you don't see an issue, we're not responding. And I don't want to, personally, I don't want to live in a community where that has to be the model. I want a community that supports PD, and we've got enough people to respond to calls for service. And that's what I'm hoping we're able to, it's a dire strait where we're at. And we do need to come up with something to fix this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah.
Very well.
Chief, could you tell me, are we at a good enough pay to recruit from other cities? Or why are we, like someone comes in, someone leaves? I can understand, retirements and stuff like that, but are we paying?
I have not had anybody leave to go to another department. We've had a couple people put in for it, but then long-term wise, they didn't do that. We did a few years ago, but they were commuting from Aurora, so they went up there because it was closer. It wasn't anything because of the pay or because of an issue with the department. It was something else that was going on. We've had people leave, but it wasn't, they left, they didn't do law enforcement anymore. They went and did something else. The issue we're going to have right now is there's a lot of people upper level in PD right now who are going to be eligible to retire in the next couple of years. That's the issue. The main issue we're going to have is trying to replace all those people who are going to leave, because it takes us a year to hire and train somebody. So, and some of them, I've got several people eligible to leave now. They're going to stay for a while, but they could come in and give me a 2-week notice and say, I decided to retire, and then I'm short a body, and it's going to take me a year. We tried, when we know when someone's going to leave, we try to hire at least 6 months out and do an overhire, just so that I've got them partially trained before that person leaves, so I don't have a vacancy that long. But right now, with my frozen positions, I haven't been able to do that.
Yeah.
I had somebody hired, and I pulled it back because I was afraid what was going to happen in July. So I went ahead and pulled that conditional offer back and said, we'll let you know if we can give it back to you again. I'm not sure what's going to happen to the budget because I don't have to let anybody off.
If someone comes in from another city that's already gone through the whole year's training and stuff, does that help?
Yeah, that's a lateral position. And usually get somebody who's a lateral, they have to have at least 3 years experience before we'll pick them up.
And do they
we haven't had a lot of laterals lately. Most of the laterals we've had have usually been from out of state to come up here. And a lot of it's quality of life, why they're moving here, because they're like living in California. Here the house is too expensive. They're living with a lot of gang activity, stuff like that, and they want to move somewhere else for their family. And we've had some of that. Recently, I think the last person we've hired as a lateral has probably been about a year now. I think it's about a year is the last one we've hired as a lateral.
Well, unless we're parallel, okay.
Chief?
Yes.
You said you've got 2 lieutenants that are likely to retire in the next year or 2.
Correct. Well, I've got one who is retiring. He's retiring at the end of this month, and he's working back for the next year. Okay, I've got a captain who's retiring, and he's retiring at the end of June. So he's actually retiring at the end of this month and working back 1 month, and then he's retired. And then I've got another lieutenant he keeps wavering. He told me he's going to retire. He told me he was going to retire back in February, and still hasn't done it. So I'm not sure what he's doing, but I'm pretty sure within a year he's most likely going to be retired, because that's his goal.
But those are your upper echelon. And
that's correct.
Replacing those folks doesn't take a year. it takes a longer period of time, or you're
Well,
promoting from
we
within
promote.
and then?
The problem we have is the ability to be able to promote up and the backfill for it.
Mhm.
So where does it impact at the very lower bottom? It's patrol.
Okay.
Because that's where someone's going to get promoted to sergeant, then someone's going to get promoted to lieutenant. If it's coming out of a specialty unit, we're going to try to move somebody from patrol to that specialty unit, because the problem we have is our specialty units, we don't really have any extra fluff in any of those. So if I lose, I've got 2 detectives who do sex crimes investigations, and I got 3 other detectives who do all general investigations and 1 computer forensic detective. That's it. So if you have a major crime, we are pulling all our resources, plus resources from the county and everybody else to help us investigate it. I mean, that's just kind of how tight we are with manpower. There's no fluff anywhere. So if something happens and somebody leaves, I have to fill that position. Well, what happens in patrol is if I run short, my overtime goes up because I don't have enough people to cover it, or I may have to run with less officers, which is a safety issue.
Thank you.
So, looks to me like the sentiment is come back with the numbers to keep police department whole.
But I need to know
However,
where
you
this
want
come
to be
from.
creative.
So some of the suggestions people have made are gonna take some time, and we're not gonna have numbers for you. You know, if you're looking at utility fees, or you're looking at franchise fees, we're not gonna have those numbers. So, in order for us to work within the current budget, we're gonna have to probably take the money from somewhere else, and so I need direction on where to take that from.
Well, Pepsi proceeds has always been our discretionary funds,
I
so.
think that, but I think that's already been,
Yeah.
has
that's
already
gone.
been promised to other places.
Right.
Is what Jorge said.
But there's nothing else extra coming in on revenues to at least have enough to,
Well, we won't know that yet, because part of the money that will be coming back will be coming from the sale of the Brandis property, but we haven't seen really anything for that yet.
yeah. However creative you can be, you know our sentiments.
Well, no, yes, kind of.
When will the loan, okay, the Brandis property's being sold, or the LA, anyway, when will that money come in?
Well, Sean can probably answer this too, but I believe that it's on an installment plan.
Yeah.
They're gonna pay us a certain amount each year.
And are they timely?
I don't know that I don't think we've closed, have we closed, Sean? On that yet?
Okay.
I think the piece that Seth is working on, you got some guaranteed cash up front, right? And then
We
it's held for a period of time, and then you've got the 3 single-family residential lots that the sale will go through once we're done building Santa Maria. Let's say that was like 220 grand or something that you'll get from that.
I think the problem is trying to find something that's sustainable. You talk about borrowing money from the Pepsi fund.
No.
And so
I don't
we
like-
increase the franchise fees, and now we have that money moving forward, but you've never raised the money to pay back the Pepsi fund. You sell the Brandis property, the one-time deal, you're doing the same thing. None of this is sustainable. And I think that's where Gina's coming from, is you got to tell me where this money is coming from. Pretty soon you run out of things to sell, is what it boils down to. And then what are you going to do?
That's why we've got to make a hard choice of looking strongly at new revenue sources.
And I'd still like to know more about bonds and levies. I mean, you could have as I understand it, if there's a normal election, like a primary or general election, you could put a levy or a bond measure on the ballot for no cost. Is that pretty accurate?
That is
But
pretty
what if you
accurate.
want to have your own election? What's that cost?
I'm not sure, Mary has shown that to me before, but I don't know that off the top of my head. I know in the interest of saving money, we were interested in doing it more during a general election. And I think it's May, I think we could do May or November. Right now, we're planning on going out for the public safety levy in May of 2020, because it's scheduled to end in 2021.
Well, that'll be with the primary, though.
Right. As far as bonds go, one of the things that they will look at for our bond rates is our reserves. And so if we start eating into our reserves, we may not get the best rates, and rates are starting to go up anyway.
Right.
And so we may just be, putting ourselves
We're just shooting ourselves in the foot.
Right.
Yes.
So bonds
Pretty soon
can't
you
be
run out of
spent on
toes.
operations, they have to be capital.
They have to be capital, right? Levies can
And
be
then
operations.
also, even to increase the levy doesn't mean that we'd get any extra money because we're already in compression. We're
Yes.
still not even pulling off 750,000 of our levy authority for the police and fire because of compression. So we have authorization for up to 750,000 more, but we're not getting it. So might not be a choice. And actually, if you increase the levy, it's going to take it away from other taxing districts too, so. Utility fee, folks, that's about
Well, what
the
about,
only option.
What about under, what'd you say, under levy?
Under levy, yeah.
Under levy, Kara.
Well, we can't
Can
make
we
that.
look at that?
Yeah.
Well,
So
so,
you can give us the numbers.
Right.
We can give you
and-
numbers.
and That's what I'm looking for. I'm
and I'll
trying to
provide that
find,
to you tomorrow.
I'm trying to look for a bridge
Yeah.
from here to there until we can turn the ship.
So Carrie is a separate budget, as you know.
I know.
Right? But I can give you those numbers if we sunset it, what that would look like.
Like yesterday.
I can send you information on that.
Right.
Chair Folden, Jeff Blaine would like to ask a question.
Okay.
Thank you. So we have a lot of public works staff, planning, building staff sitting in the back that did a lot of the detailed line item work on our budgets, and they spend a lot of time, extra time outside of normal work hours already. I'd like to not have them have to come back to the next meeting if they don't have to. So if there's not going to be any detailed questions or you haven't identified any yet, it'd be helpful if we could hear that. We could tell them they can not spend their time with us next week, and Chris and I will do our best
I don't
to
think that's
cover
fair.
stuff.
Well, Jeff, don't you know all the answers?
Close.
What kind of supervisor are you?
Remember Delaporte's quote of "never in doubt, often wrong."
So we won't torture them anymore to have to sit through this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
They can watch it online.
I appreciate them being here.
Stay close to the phone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can just say where their phone and do Jorge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay?
So I'll just close, just reminding you that the budget is balanced right now, even though it does involve the service level cuts that we talked about and the very difficult decisions we've been talking about for a year. It is balanced right now. So, and we'll come back with the answers to the questions that were posed, but, as far as finding monies to come up with enough to make everybody whole, I don't know that that's possible.
Well, and to repeat myself, I think any new revenue streams are going to be in the 2021 portion of the
Right.
budget. We're not going to be able to come up with something in the next few months to help out this budget.
Right.
The first year of the budget.
Well, there was some talk about raising firemen.
Pardon me?
It's not.
Yeah, that's not enough, yeah.
Not enough to do this, but it's enough to put a hole in it. And you don't, if all you ever want to do is say, okay, we need 500,000, so we're going to go for 500,000, you can go for 100,000 5 times, a whole lot easier than 500,000 once.
Peter, what we passed last night for the fire department, was that exactly what you needed, or did you have a little bit, is there any extra from that we could?
Well, that's, and again, I'll ask Chief to weigh in, but that was approximately $900,000.
Okay.
And as we mentioned, it was enough to restore all of the drastic cuts that we talked about, except the 3 frozen positions that the chief just talked about. So it left a little bit left over, which, as I mentioned in the beginning of the session tonight, 125,000 of that we put towards the police department, and we left 132,000 available to float Maple Lawn for 12 months until GAPS and other nonprofits could possibly come up with a solution for taking over the program.
You said keep Maple on for a year or just 6
12
months?
months.
Do it for 6 months.
Yeah, we could do it for 6 months
Go
and
to the
that'd
end
give
of
them some.
end of the annual year.
Yeah,
I mean, it
that'd
gives
give them a
enough time to
chance. Do
get the
something.
work started.
Well, that too, we would need direction on, because the program changes that Gina sent to you today and laid in front of you provided for 12. Now, keep in mind that there would also be tuition increases associated with that.
We're not fixing this right now.
Okay, so we'll
All right,
start,
we're done.
reconvene on the 14th.
Thank you.